Hello and welcome to IGOW4. My name is Dan Sugano, but most people call me my pilot name, which is FPV Skittles, or just Skittles. I am the creator of IGOW and a professional Whoop pilot. In the previous 3 seasons, the structure of IGOW has remained essentially the same, but in IGOW4 I have made a bunch of changes that are intended to make the game a more reasonable length and adjust for issues that have come up in previous seasons. I have put a lot of thought, time, and effort into improving the competition, and one of the changes I have made that I think will help is adding a 4-week-long preseason to the beginning of the game. So that's about to start right now on 4/20, and the preseason is not required. So if you decide to skip the preseason weeks, that's fine. If you attempt them all and fail, that's also fine. There is no penalty for the preseason. The letters and that part of the game all starts in the regular season, which begins May 18th. So we don't have nearly the time to go over all the changes I've made in Season 4, but all of that info can be found at www.internationalgameofwhoop.com. The website will host everything you need to know about IGOW, and I also highly suggest you join the IGOW Discord group and Facebook group to stay up to date on all things IGOW. Alright, so that was a brief introduction of IGOW4. Let's jump into the first preseason challenge, the Tiny Whoop Basics of Flight. Hello IGOW players, it's time for IGOW4. Who's excited? Alright, so we're going to be starting off with the preseason, and the first challenge is the Tiny Whoop Basics of Flight. So in previous seasons of IGOW, I had to do most of the work by myself, making up the videos and doing the flying. But now that I'm big time in IGOW4, I have a whole team working with me to make sure that everything runs smoothly. So let's go over to IGOW Studios now, where the team is going to explain this first preseason challenge. Thanks, Skittles! Hello, IGOW players, and welcome to IGOW Studios, where we will discuss the specific requirements for the weekly challenges of IGOW4. For this first preseason week, we have 3 basic skills that you must learn in order to successfully pass the challenge. The first skill is forward flight with turning. For this first part of the challenge, you're going to need to set up 2 poles 5 feet apart from each other, and then you're going to have to fly 2 clean figure 8s around those poles. You're not allowed to bump into the poles or the walls around them or anything else, and you're also not allowed to tap the ground or the ceiling if you're doing it inside. So in IGOW we refer to that as no bumps or no ground taps. Alright, so now let's go to in-house reporter Dan, who will break down how to approach this challenge and give some examples of successful figure 8s.
Hello, it's video editor Dan here, and today when I was putting the video together, I realized that no one went over what the sticks do in relation to making the drone move. So I'm going to go over the very basics of that now before in-house reporter Dan teaches you how to do forward flight with turning. Alright, so here we have our radio, and we have 2 sticks. You can see I'm in mode 2, which is the most common mode. That's the left stick having throttle here up and down and yaw left and right, and then on the right stick you have pitch up and down and roll or aileron left and right. So how that makes the drone react is obviously throttle up and down gives you more power to the propellers, so as you push the throttle up the drone should go higher or faster. And then on the same stick you also have yaw, which turns the drone left and right on a flat axis. And then on the other stick you have pitch, which is the drone tipping forward or back, and then also roll, which is kind of like strafe in a first-person shooter game, and that's left and right roll. It'll tilt you to the side, whereas yaw will twist your drone. Alright, so there's a basic overview of what your sticks are going to do. So now let's go to in-house reporter Dan so he can show you forward flight with turning.
Hello IGOW4 players, I'm in-house reporter Dan, and the first challenge of the IGOW4 preseason is the Tiny Whoop Basics of Flight. So for this first part of the challenge, we're going to be going over the most basic skill you can have when flying a tiny whoop, and that is forward flight and turning. So the requirements for this part of the challenge are that we set up 2 poles and we set them 5 feet apart. So let's do that real quick. If you have an IGOW pack of PVC, it's simple. I just take a 5-way, stick 4 ends in it. There's 1 pole. Alright, so now that we have our obstacle set up, let's get into the flying. Alright, so for our very first flight, if you've never tried flying before, I would suggest starting in level. It's also known as angle or stable mode. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep the drone level to the horizon when you're not giving it any inputs. So as you can see, when I first start off here, I'm going to arm the quad and then slowly raise the throttle to take off. And then it's going to stay more or less level until I give it some forward pitch. That's on the right stick. Then I'm going to start flying around, and I'm in a small area, so I'm already having to steer. And what I think you should do to start is pick a direction that you feel comfortable with, and try to fly around the poles in circles. So I think left feels more natural for me, pushing the sticks slightly away. And you can see I'm putting a little bit of yaw input in, along with also a little bit of roll. And then once you get comfortable with one direction, switch to the other. So now a little bit of yaw. And the biggest part here is your throttle control, which we'll be going over in the next part of the challenge. Keeping your drone from going up or down too much is going to be one of the biggest challenges for you if you're a brand new pilot. As you can see, I'm barely moving the sticks, not much at all, to get the correct height. So you don't want to be doing massive up and down like movements like this to try to stay. Alright, so now for the challenge requirements. Like IGOW Studio Dan talked about, you need to complete 2 figure 8s without any bumps or ground taps. So no bump in the poles, the walls, the ground, the ceiling. And you can do them either direction. Obviously you're turning both ways in a figure 8, so just switch it up. You always want to practice things both directions as much as you can when you're learning, so you don't get a bias. Alright, so we've already completed more than 2 in a row, and we're done with the first part of the Tiny Whoop Basics of Flight. So we just flew in angle mode there, which I briefly explained before, but that is when the flight controller always holds your drone level to the horizon. So if you give it a little bit of a left roll, it'll start to drift left, but then as soon as you recenter the stick, it'll go back to level. And that's really helpful for learning at the beginning of flight. But for most of freestyle, you're going to need to fly in acro mode. So if you want to jump straight into the fire, let's go over that now. And acro mode, instead of the flight controller always returning back to level when you stop your input, it will just hold the drone at the orientation that you last gave it. So if you pitch forward, then the drone will stay pitched forward until you give it some other input. Like to go back to level, you'd have to pitch back rather than just letting go of the stick. So that's a little tricky at first, but if you're brand new to flying, you might want to just start straight into acro, so you don't have to break any angle habits. But angle definitely is a little bit easier, I think, to start. So it's up to you which one you want to go with. Both are allowed for this challenge. So now let's do some acro flying around the poles. Alright, so now we're going to be flying in acro. So just like before, you're going to arm and then slowly raise the throttle to take off. But this time, we don't have to hold the stick forward to get the forward momentum. We just tap it forward and then it'll stay there. And we'll stay flying forward. So if we hold the stick forward in
Acro mode, we're just going to just fall into the ground like this. And you definitely don't want to do that. So, it's definitely a different flight style, but it's what you're going to need to be able to do the flips and rolls and everything. So, just get a tiny bit of pitch forward, fly nice and slow, and then use that pitch and roll to turn around the poles. If you feel yourself starting to go too fast, like, oh no, oh no, oh no, just pitch back, and you'll slow down. You can hopefully catch control again. Alright, so we've got left down, that's what we started with last time. Let's turn around and try the other direction. Alright, so now we're doing some right spins. Stick motions are similar between Acro and Angle, but obviously not the same. And alright, now let's finish it off with the figure eights. This might be a little tricky. You've never flown an Acro, but a little practice and you'll get it down. Alright, and the other way. Acro, of course, new rolls.
Thanks, in-house reporter Dan. For the second part of the Tiny Whoop Basics of Flight Challenge, you're going to need to hover in place. So the requirements for this part of the challenge are that you create an IGOW approved cube gate. For that you could use a Tiny Whoop cube gate, or you could create a cube gate out of anything. Here at IGOW we suggest PVC because it's so versatile, and you can get yourself a PVC connector set at fyscrafts.com. Alright, so let's go back down to in-house reporter Dan so he can show us how to approach the second part of the challenge. Thanks, IGOW Studio Dan. Okay, so for the second part of the challenge, we're going to need to create an IGOW approved cube obstacle and then hover inside of it. If you happen to have a Tiny Whoop cube gate, that's one of the easiest ways to set up the obstacle. You just open it up, and bam, IGOW approved cube obstacle. IGOW approved just means that all 4 of the gates are within the IGOW regulations for gates, which is 28 inches or about 72 centimeters max inside dimension. So for a square, side to side; for a circle, the diameter, and anything that would fit inside that would also be approved. So if you already have a cube gate, boom, you're good to go. If you don't have a cube gate, you can easily create one out of materials from around the home. And at IGOW, we really suggest PVC because it's so versatile, and besides just the obstacle for the week, you can create many other things. So to create an IGOW approved cube gate out of PVC, the minimum you're going to need is 8 sections and 4 3-ways. So pretty simple. Put the 4 3-ways around the top corners. Connect all the corners. Put on the legs. And there you have an IGOW approved cube obstacle. So, put it back here. You can use the ground as one of the sides of the cube gate. So just having no sides along the bottom is totally fine if your cube gate is placed on the ground. But if for some reason the cube gate needed to be raised up in the air, this would no longer be allowed. So to make a full cube gate, you'll need 8 3-ways and 12 total sections. So 4 more than we had before. we have an IGOW approved cubed obstacle made out of PVC. And also okay, so for the second part of the challenge, we're just going to jump straight into Acro because this is a freestyle competition and you are going to have to learn Acro eventually if you want to progress far. Plus, the stick movements between Acro and angle for something like hovering in place aren't going to be that different. We're going to be making small and minimal adjustments. So, as always, we're going to arm and take off. And then let's try to get control of ourselves and be more or less still. And then slowly enter the cube, just tiny adjustments. And then we're going to want to hover in place once we're in the cube. So try to keep the same elevation. If you see yourself dripping back, tilt a little forward. See yourself tilting a little left, go right. Just try to stay in place as best as possible. Alright, so that was definitely 7 seconds inside the PVC cube. Let's give it a go in the Tiny Whoop cube. Slowly entering. It's a little ground effect there. Alright, try to get control. There we go. Hover in place. We drift back, tilt forward. We drift right, tilt left. Try your best to stay as motionless as possible. For 7 seconds minimum. And that's the challenge requirement. So, again, try to make very minimal adjustments on your sticks. You don't want to be doing giant movements in this type of thing, just enough to get yourself back to the center of the cube. So then once you're done with the requirements, you can have some fun, mess around with the cubes. Whoa, try that again. Whee. Alright, let's call that good.
Thanks again, in-house reporter Dan. What a great guy. So much knowledge. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, the third and final part of the Tiny Whoop Basics of Flight Challenge is the first 2 tricks that pretty much anyone tries when attempting FPV freestyle for the first time, and that is the flip and the roll. For this final part of the challenge, you must complete all 4 of the following: a front flip, a back flip, a left roll, and a right roll. These tricks do not have to be in any particular order, and they don't even have to be in the same clip. You can perform the tricks inside or outside, which we actually suggest for newer pilots so you have a lot more room. Speaking of outside, let's go to field correspondent Dan so he can show you how to perform these maneuvers. I said, let's go to field correspondent Dan so he can show you how to perform these maneuvers. Where's field correspondent Dan? Let me check real quick. Field correspondent Dan, get up, what are you doing? Oh no, is it time for IGOW4 already? Ah! Oh shit, I gotta go. Forgot my keys. Field Correspondent Dan here, reporting on location from a place we're going to suggest you go many times in the early game of IGOW4, and that is a big open field with some nice soft ground. Now you're going to want to fly here when you're learning tricks in real life at first, because when you're learning new things, you're going to crash. And when you crash, you want to reduce the chance that you're going to break or damage your whoops. This will allow you to last longer in the IGOW game and cost you less money overall. So we highly suggest you go somewhere like here, a football field with some AstroTurf, or grass field works great. Anything where the ground is soft, as opposed to like a parking lot where you're going to crash on concrete and definitely cause more damage. Alright, so now let's go to some stick cam so we can go over this part of this week's challenge, the flips and rolls. Alright, today we're going to show you the basic stick movements for flips and rolls. So we're out here at the local high school football field, and we're going to want to fly over this soft AstroTurf like we were talking about, some nice soft ground. First we're going to want to get some forward momentum. We're going to want to pop up, cut the throttle, do the roll, and then slowly apply the throttle again to catch ourselves. So let's try that again, this time with a flip. Fly forward, pop up, cut the throttle, do the flip, slowly apply the throttle again to catch ourselves. Alright, just for good measure, let's do all of them. Hit a right pulse, let's do a left. Pop up, cut, roll, catch, and the back flip. Alright, fly forward, pop up, cut the throttle, flip, and catch. Alright, so that's all it takes. Some flips and rolls, the very basic maneuver of FPV freestyle. So you can mix them into your freestyle like I like to go. Maddie, move all the birds. Roll. Looks very nice and fun.
Field reporter Dan. I don't know what we're going to do with that guy. Alright IGOW players, I hope you enjoyed this first preseason challenge of IGOW4, the Tiny Whoop Basics of Flight. And remember, the entire preseason is not required, so if you decide to skip this challenge, or if you attempt it and fail it, it will not count against you in any way. The part of the game where you get letters is the regular season, and that doesn't begin until May 18th. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. For myself, IGOW Studio Dan, in-house reporter Dan, field correspondent Dan, and of course FPV Skittles, we all say good luck and happy whooping!